Widely considered one of the greatest American novels, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, tells the story of Huck Finn and his companion, the slave Jim, as they journey down the Mississippi River after running away from Huck's alcoholic father and Jim's owners. As the novel unfolds, Mark Twain explores themes of racism, friendship, loyalty, civilization, and how the title character, Huck Finn, deals with moral ambiguities. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is set in the Mississippi Valley in the 1840s. Huckleberry Finn and his friend Tom Sawyer continue their adventures from the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Huck is now in danger of being civilized by his adoptive caretaker, the widow Douglas. Jim, a slave belonging to the widow's sister Miss Watson, predicts that Tom's missing father is alive and that both father and son stand upon a perilous moral edge. Soon after, the father in question appears, appending Huck's life. Huck stands to inherit $6,000, a fortune in 1840s America, and Pap wants all the money. The authorities in the town of St. Petersburg fend Huck's father off and attempt to win sole guardianship of Huck from the widow, and so Pap kidnaps Huck, keeping him under lock and key several miles outside town. Huck finds uncivilized life rewarding but hates and fears his father, so he fakes his own death and escapes on a canoe down the river. On Jackson Island, Huck discovers Jim, who ran away from Miss Watson upon learning he was to be sold to a crueler master down the river. They spend a few leisurely weeks on the island, exploring the nearby surroundings. They discover a dead body in a collapsed house, and Jim hides its identity from Huck. Later, when they discover that Jim is wanted for Huck's murder, they assemble a raft and float south with the current. As they travel, they learn more about each other and marvel at the passing lights of St. Louis. They discover a criminal conspiracy in a wrecked riverboat and learn to adapt to various assumed identities when negotiating with the people they meet. They plan to meet the Ohio Riverhead and to purchase riverboat fare into the northeastern Free States, but they lose the crossing in a dense fog. Continuing south, they deftly avoid a pack of slave catchers, only to get upended and separated by a riverboat. Thrown on shore, Huck is adopted by the Grangerford family. Huck becomes fast friends with the family, especially with Buck, a boy his own age. The Grangerfords are in a mortal rivalry with the Shepherdsons. When Huck assists in the elopement of two members of the rival families, violence erupts. This skirmish leaves most of the male Grangerfords dead. Jim and Huck escape on the raft, which Jim has repaired while in hiding. Soon after, Jim and Huck aid in the escape of a couple of scoundrels who introduce themselves as the King of France and the Duke of Bridgewater. The scoundrels quickly take command of the raft and recruit Jim and Huck in a series of money-making campaigns. First, the king makes considerable money collecting from a revival meeting, concocting a story about saving the souls of immoral pirates. Then, a town over, the pair put on a nonsuch play, fleecing the town of their admission fees. Later, they learn everything there is to know about the recently deceased patriarch of the Wilkes family and about a pair of lost Wilkes brothers up for a large inheritance. The Duke and the King quickly ingratiate themselves to the trusting Wilkes family, gaining a large bag of money and rights to the Wilkes estate. Huck privately foils the plan, but not before the Wilkeses are put into miserable disarray. The scoundrels barely escape with their lives. Further downriver, the King and the Duke sell Jim to a man named Silas Phelps under false pretenses. The men are soon discovered to be frauds for other reasons and run out of town. Huck plots to rescue Jim and discovers that Silas and Sally Phelps are kin to his friend Tom Sawyer. The Phelpses mistake Huck for Tom. Tom soon arrives, excited for a new adventure, and agrees to pretend to be another Phelps cousin named Sid. Together, the boys conspire to rescue Jim from Silas Phelps's log cabin prison. This culminates in the accidental but non-fatal shooting of Tom and a near riot among the townsfolk. Tom soon recovers from his wound and confesses, admitting his and Huck's true identities and revealing that Miss Watson freed Jim long ago. Jim then reveals that Huck is free of his father, whose dead body Jim found early in their travels. Huck concludes that he's had enough of civilization and intends to travel west. In the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, blacks are subject to dehumanizing treatment from nearly every white character in the book. This is not inconsistent with a tale set in the pre-Civil War South, where blacks were routinely viewed as property above all else. Indeed, one of Huck's primary inner conflicts deals with his wicked impulses to treat Jim as more than just someone's property. Additionally, Jim's escape is prompted when Miss Watson considers selling him off to a slave trader despite the fact that Jim has served her well and she knows that such an action would separate Jim from his family. For many characters in the novel, the notion that blacks are indeed people simply seems beyond any consideration. In many scenes, Twain appears to be satirizing the callousness with which people at that time routinely dismissed the black people's personhood. In the final chapters of the book, Tom Sawyer devises an elaborate plan to free Jim from the cabin where he is being held. Tom treats Jim as a sort of set piece in his grand escape production, without any noticeable regard for Jim's comfort or needs. Tom asks Jim to perform nonsensical and in some cases impossible acts, and even fills Jim's bed with spiders and snakes. Ultimately, Huck is the only major character to treat Jim with the respect of an equal, and even when he does, he curses himself for doing what he believes is an immoral thing. Slavery is one of the key thematic elements in the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The novel takes place in Missouri in the 1830s or 1840s, at a time when Missouri was considered a slave state. Soon after Huck fakes his own death, he partners with Jim, a runaway slave from the household where Huck used to live. Although the book purports to be about Huck's adventures, the story is driven by Jim's attempt to achieve freedom and safety for himself, and ultimately for his wife and children. Huck is, in a sense, just along for the journey. However, it is Huck's perspective on Jim's struggle that allows the author to address the topic of slavery in a unique and entertaining way. By telling the story from the point of view of a young white man raised amid slavery, Twain looks at the issue from an entirely different viewpoint than previous writers. While Huck almost never fails to do the right thing in the eyes of the reader, because of his upbringing he cannot help but feel that his actions are actually wicked and immoral. When Huck first finds Jim, he promises not to reveal Jim's secret. "People would call me a low-down abolitionist and despise me for keeping mum, but that don't make no difference. I ain't a-going to tell." As Jim believes he is close to achieving his own freedom, his thoughts turn toward saving his family from slavery. Huck is shocked by Jim's plans, which he relates to the reader. He was saying how the first thing he would do when he got to a free state he would go to saving up money and never spend a single cent, and when he got enough he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm close to where Miss Watson lived, and then they would both work to buy the 2 children, and if their master wouldn't sell them, they'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. The issue of slavery plays a part in the most important events in the book. Jim runs away because he believes he will be sold to a slave trader and separated from his family. Huck lies to people he meets to hide the fact that Jim is a runaway slave. The king turns Jim in as a runaway slave, not knowing Jim actually is one, just to con some locals for cash. Tom and Huck help Jim escape his captors so he can again try for his freedom. Jim forfeits his freedom in order to help keep Tom alive, and finally, the pair realize that all their running and scheming was in vain because Jim is a free man after all. Throughout the novel, the white characters operate under the belief that Jim, because he is black, simply cannot comprehend certain concepts and explanations. Huck in particular comments on numerous occasions about Jim's inability to understand the way the world works. The recurring irony in the adventures of Huckleberry Finn is that the white characters frequently have an inaccurate or even absurd view of how the world works themselves. Twain uses this device to great comic effect by showing that Jim often has more common sense or cleverness than the other characters in the book, though prejudice prevents the other characters from seeing it. For example, when Huck tries to explain to Jim why it is natural for French people to speak a different language, Jim takes Huck's own flawed logic and turns it on its head, proving that it makes no sense at all for French people to speak a different language. Huck fails to even acknowledge that Jim has outwitted him. Even when Jim is recognized for his commendable actions, prejudice still taints the acknowledgement he receives. When Tom is shot during the attempt to free Jim, Jim decides he will not leave Tom until a doctor has treated him. even though such an act will probably cost Jim his freedom. When Jim says this, Huck tells the reader he knows Jim is actually white inside. The implication in Huck's words is that only a white person could show such kindness and consideration for another person. And though any white person who had been instrumental in helping to save Tom's life would have been hailed as a hero, the doctor's praise is limited to simply letting everyone know that Jim ain't no bad person. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Intended at first as a simple story of a boy's adventures in the Mississippi Valley, grew and matured under Twain's hand into a work of immeasurable richness and complexity. More than a century after its publication, the critical debate over the symbolic significance of Huck's and Jim's voyage is still fresh, and it remains a major work that can be enjoyed at many levels, as an incomparable adventure story and as a classic of American literature.